Our first guest knows we need to stop spending before the economy freezes over. Welcome back, Senator Ron Johnson, entrepreneur, Republican from Wisconsin, defender of small government. Senator, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Well, Judge, it's great to be on.
Were you as surprised as the rest of us when we learned this morning that in the 8 months following September of 2008, the Federal Reserve created out of thin air and doled out $7.7 trillion to its favored banks? That's more than half the present federal debt of the United States government.
Well, it's a pretty eye-popping figure. I do want to study it a little bit further to see whether that was actually lent out all at one point in time, or where that's kind of an accumulation of all the loans. As you take a look at the individual loans to banks, it seems like it wouldn't total up that amount, but I have to study that a little bit further, Judge.
If the number is correct, and it was obtained from Federal Reserve documents through a lawsuit that Fox Business was involved with, along with our colleagues at Bloomberg News, and it says that it is an accumulation in the 8 months from September 08 to March and April of 09. Wouldn't that be an explanation for how inflation got so bad, with the Fed creating out of thin air a amount of money in that magnitude in that period of time? Senator Johnson, you may know this. In one day, December 5th, 2008, $1.2 trillion, more in that day than any other day in American history.
No, Judge, it's very concerning, but we do need to go back to what the root cause of the problem was here. You know, I don't envy the Fed their task. You can only do so much with monetary policy, trying to bail out the failed policies of this administration and, quite honestly, of prior Congresses. I mean, the whole problem that this started with the housing bubble, and that was created by government. And that is the root cause of the problem in terms of our current financial situation. But the problem that we're all grappling with now is this Keynesian experiment. All the debt and deficits that we're spending, the $15 trillion that we've amassed,
right.
That's what we have to start turning our attention to.
So the president, in 3 years in office, not quite 3, has added to our debt in the amount of $5 trillion. And he's lecturing Europe as you and I talk about European debt problems. What kind of sense does that make?
Well, what you really need to do is take a look at the history of this. You know, back in September 30th of 1987, our total federal debt was $2.3 trillion. If you take a look at it right now, it's at $15 trillion, and according to President Obama's budget, scored by the CBO, in 2021, it would be $27.6 trillion. I mean, that's an astounding level. But if you just go back to September of 1987, $2.3 trillion. Judge, we just voted. I didn't vote, but Congress did vote,
right,
to increase the debt ceiling by $2.4 trillion. And we'll go through that in about 2 years, when it took us 2 centuries to accumulate $2.3 trillion. That's how fast, that's how rapidly we're increasing our debt in this country.
This is very, very dangerous stuff. And you and I have talked on air and off about a day of reckoning that might come with very, very
right.
little notice. The super committee died over the Thanksgiving break. Are those automatic cuts going to come in and take place, or is Congress going to find some way to get itself out from the law it tried to impose upon itself 6 months ago?
Well, it's interesting, of course, that these sequestration amounts don't kick in until 2013. Or does that give Congress a little bit of time here? Now, Judge, we've got to start getting serious about this. You know, one of the problems we've got here is that you add the $15 trillion onto the total amount of unfunded liabilities in Social Security, Medicare, and federal retirees. That totals $99 trillion. If you compare that to the total asset base of the United States, that's $79 trillion. So we have liabilities in our federal government worth $99 trillion when our assets are only $79 trillion. That's the problem we need to start addressing.
Didn't the founders have the idea that big government was more to be feared than welcomed? And didn't they give us a constitution so that these things would not be happening?
That's exactly what that is really the premise of our founding fathers, of our government, our limited government. To limit the size of government, they haven't done a very good job. You know, 100 years ago, government was about 2 or 3% of GDP. Now it reached as high as 25% in the last couple of years, and it's on a trajectory to go much higher.
Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.